Um, okay, so Emily is very special to Mothers Together. She played a really big role these last couple years. Before the pandemic, she coordinated all the childcare for us, so we were able to leave our kids in safe hands and felt good about having our coffee and snacks and being able to hear a great message. So thank you, Emily, for that. She has 2 boys of her own, and she's attended Mothers Together for 4 years now. She currently is working now as a public health professional. This is her first time teaching here at Mothers Together, so we're really excited to hear from her. And this past year seems to have been a little rough for her. I don't know if she's going to go into it today, but maybe her next teaching in 2 weeks, she might get into it. But a little insight, she had 3 pediatric hospitalizations. She moved, had a remodel disaster where they had to fire a contractor, COVID, Bell's palsy, and type 1 diabetes, all while starting a new job. So she's had a really, really big year. So I feel like God has really worked with her and was with her every step of the way there. And I know she's excited to share her story with all of us. So without further ado, Emily.
Thank you, Kelly. That was such a good introduction. I feel so excited to be here. I'm a little nervous, so I will try to control my nerves, but you all of your faces in front of me just make me feel at home. I so miss being in the sanctuary together. So hopefully we can get through this together. I'm not going to share too much about this past year with you because I really want to save that for my next talk. It has been quite a year, but I know all of you have had really rough years too. So hopefully we can kind of get through this last part of Isaiah together. The good news is that it is really a sandwich, and I think it's called, I'm going to mispronounce this, Mitzi, a chiasm of thought. So when we go to the end of Isaiah, they actually have looked at it and thought that maybe it was written by 2 different people. But actually, I think it's a tool to really bring home the message. So the beginning of the end, if you will, of Isaiah 56 starts out with looking at Israel and talking to what Israel's behavior is like. And then it kind of moves into talking about the good news, the best news ever that we just listened to on that audio, on that video of Jesus is coming, this divine warrior will save us, and then kind of ends with talking about, again, Israel's behavior and failure to meet that. So you can kind of think of it as a mountain. For this first part, I want to build up to that mountain. I want to talk through that beginning part, and then I'm going to really focus on that good news in my next session. So I kind of titled this one, Joyously Surrendering Control. I am a control freak. I don't know about all of you, but I have always been that way. I think it's my way of handling stress. So when I get stressed out, I feel like if I control everything, then I won't be as stressed and I can prevent any bad thing from happening to me, right? So today I'm going to kind of talk about letting go of that control and how God has worked in my life and our family to help me with that. And guys, I have needed a lot of work because I am quite a control freak. All right, so let me see here. I have my notes here in front of me, but I want to see all of your faces. So Isaiah 56 opens up, and like I said, it's a sandwich, right? Your chiasm. We're thinking about building up to this idea of the divine warrior coming in. And it opens up, 56 opens up with talking about righteousness and the concept of righteousness. And I find, and I don't know about you guys, but when you're in your Bible study groups or in your life, or even if you're new to studying the Bible, righteousness is kind of a hard word to define. It's a hard thing to think about. How I think about it and how I've heard it best described is kind of a spiritual rebirth, issuing in changed behavior. So I like to think this is the Holy Spirit in us when we accept Jesus Christ into our hearts and we accept God into our lives, and we start walking that path naturally by letting the Holy Spirit work within us. We get changed, and how we see the world is changed, and how we interact with each other is changed. And I really think that is my best way of understanding righteousness. But essentially what Isaiah is looking at in the beginning of 56 is talking to how Israel is lacking in righteous behavior. These are people that are born into believing in God. They're brought up in religious families, and their behavior is not one of a Christian or what you would think as a righteous person. So Isaiah defines it as righteousness as a glad conformity to God's wishes. And it's not a birthright. So it's a choice that we make. And Isaiah 56:11 goes on to describe how Israel is living now. They are dogs with mighty appetites. They never have enough. They are shepherds who lack understanding. They turn to their own way. They seek their own gain. Come, each one cries, let me get wine. Let us drink our fill of beer. And tomorrow will be like today, or even far better. And I will say that this is kind of a vivid description of how they're living, right? It kind of describes, my study Bible describes it as they've fallen prey to temptation, to self-indulgence, to things like sleep and appetites, their own way, their own gain. And me in my late 20s was probably a lot like Israel in this illustration. I believed in God, I had faith, but I was rocking my career in my late 20s. I was doing really well. I was about to get married. I planned this big wedding, spent all this money on a wedding that I had saved for, that I had made happen. I knew that I wanted, 2 kids, a house, a picket fence in Northern California. I had it planned. I knew what I was doing and I was in control. Yes, I believed in God, but I was rocking life, right? And so I think that and I indulged in, fun behavior, and I had idols, right? I focused on material objects and making more money and having more things, and being this perfect looking person as much as I could. And my appearance was important to me. And this is normal things that we all have in our human lives that we kind of fall victim to, feeling like we're actually in control. And that idolatry opposes us joyously submitting to God, because it's saying, I'm going to work things out. I'm going to control things for my own good. And so kind of just illustrating that with my own kind of example and being kind of just honest with you all. So I got married, and my husband and I, in 2012, my husband, Zach, and I got married in Calistoga. It was a beautiful day. It was the best day ever. And I wanted to have babies really soon. I mean, we were not financially ready for babies, but I definitely wanted babies. And so I waited a little bit. It probably wasn't until 2014 that we started to try. I got off birth control pills, which I had been on for over a decade. And sorry, don't tell my mom. And I didn't have a cycle for for 6 months. And I started to realize that something might be wrong. And when I think back, and I'm really honest, I don't think I had normal periods as an adolescent, but I was young and I didn't realize that it wasn't normal. And so we went to a reproductive endocrinologist and started to do tests. Everything on the tests looked normal. There was no reason or explanation for why this was occurring. And I can tell you that that is almost harder news. When you're having something hard in your life happen and you don't have a defined reason, it's hard. So you even more try to take control. I took supplements. I went to acupuncture. I did everything to try to gain control of this situation that I didn't have control of. So quickly, all of that stuff that I had felt pride in and had focused on, it slipped away. So when something bad happens and life gets hard, you really realize that all those things that I was craving, they didn't matter. They weren't important. This one thing that I felt like I was called to do was to be a mother, I had no control over and no ability to make happen. And it was really hard. And Tim Keller says it best, and I think it's definitely my theme for this talk, is we don't realize Jesus is all we need until Jesus is all we have. So it wasn't until I was literally brought to my knees in this situation that I really had to do the work with my relationship with God and looking at my behavior. And I'm not saying that this story's ending is because I did that work. I'm just saying that this is what it brought me to. And I think God was continually trying to bring me closer to him and work this out with me, because he knew this was coming and he wanted to see me through. So we did 3 IUIs, which for those on the call that aren't familiar with the terminology, it's just a procedure that you kind of do prior to IVF. So it's an insemination. Those all failed, all negative, never even a positive test ever, and no losses, just no positives. And then the test kept looking normal. So we went on to IVF. And thankfully had enough money that we had saved that we could afford the very expensive procedure. And my first IVF, I was so hopeful. I went through this process that they call stimulation of your ovaries. Everything looked so good. And we were so hopeful. And you think, oh, we're at IVF. Of course, IVF works for people. There's no way that my problem is so big that IVF won't work. And so I remember it really distinctly. I got a call from our endocrinologist, and it was the worst call of my life. I will say to this day, I've never reacted so strongly to something. And I'm smiling, but I'm not good at showing my emotion on cue. So I will say that it was horrible. So she called us to tell us that all of my eggs had come out either immature or overcooked. So it was really an issue with me. So all along, when my numbers looked normal, I thought, well, maybe it's my husband, or maybe it's just timing, or maybe it's all these other factors. But no, when we got the eggs out of that IVF, it confirmed that there was something I felt at that moment broken in me. And it was my oven was broken. So I had all the ingredients for my recipe, but when it came out, they just were undercooked or overcooked. I hit the floor on my knees praying to God. I've never in my life experienced anything close to that. And I realized for the 90th time in my life that I keep needing it, that I am fully not in control of what is happening. And I need Jesus more than I ever needed him before. Because how do you get through that? How do you get that news and move forward? So as we move through Isaiah 57:13 says, when you cry out for help, let your collection of idols save you. The wind will carry all of them off. A mere breath will blow them away. But whoever takes refuge in me will inherit the land and possess my holy mountain. So realizing you are not in control, it's a hard thing to learn, but it is so freeing because you know where your heart is, and it gives you peace when you remove those idols. So I decided in that moment, after that phone call, that God was going to be my compass, and my life plan as I had known it was not mine anymore, and it never was meant to be. I knew God had a plan for me, and I needed to trust him to live it out. Isaiah 57:15 goes on to talk about how God lives in a high and holy place, but also with the one who is contrite. Contrite means crushed by our problems in Hebrew, and lowly in spirit, to revive the spirit of the lowly and to revive the heart of the contrite. So I, in this moment, was more than ever in my life crushed by my problems and low in spirit. And those who are contrite and confess their inability to live righteous lives and their attempts to exalt themselves through idolatry will find God more than ready to revive them, heal them, and encourage them. You guys, I have always been called to Isaiah, and I am admittedly someone who struggles with my consistency of my Bible study. And I will say, when I got asked by Mitzi to teach and it came out that it was Isaiah, I felt like it was God all along. I mean, this passage, how much was this written for my life? It's just incredible. God gives us, so at the end of this story, that phone call, when all of those eggs looked weird, either immature or overcooked, there was one little embryo in there that they were able to mature in a petri dish. They were able to grow in a petri dish and fertilize, and that is my 4.5-year-old son. So it's cool that you guys are on mute. I can see your reactions, which is just incredible. We went on to another IVF that failed also, I will say. So we still had our struggles to get back to him because we only had one and the chances weren't very good that one would work. So we went back and tried to get more. We did get one more, and we implanted both those two, a girl and a boy. And Warner, my 4.5-year-old, was the one that took. The girl tried, but we lost her early on in the pregnancy. And I feel like she kind of was needed to help him. I felt like her levels helped his pregnancy be more successful. So I feel like it was always meant to be. And I will say, I never look back on this story now, 4.5 years later, and think, oh my gosh, I wish I hadn't gone through that. Or if we only hadn't gone through IVF. I am so thankful that the Lord brought me through this journey because it changed who I was in every single way. So Warner was born, and I mean, I just worshiped him. I showed up to Mother's Together with a 6-month-old, but I was a little bit stressed out all the time about him because we worked so hard to get him. I didn't want to break him. And I will say though that over time, I feel like I was told this testimony to anyone I could and shared our journey and our story. But over time, life takes over again, right? Our priorities start to shift. We drift back to old behavior. We take advantage, or we take for granted what we have and what we have fought so hard to earn and what God has fought hard for us for. And so Isaiah goes on to explain in 58 that you can't have it both ways. He talks about sin and a level of hypocrisy that sometimes Christians live, particularly Israel in this example, that though we really want to know God and his ways and study him, we also want to live the way we want to live and have God's blessing at the same time. So we're kind of all mixed into this. We want to take back some of that control. So I will say that coming into baby number 2, I knew as soon as Warner was born that I was going to want another baby. That I had to really do some more work too, right? Because I knew it was going to probably be a really hard journey. And it wasn't easy. I'm not going to end this infertility talk with all of you and say, oh, we just suddenly got pregnant and it was easy and life just turned out perfectly the way I wanted. I think my journey has taught me that God is always with me and faithful, but my ending or the end result might not be what I pictured or I exactly wanted, but it'll be better. And the journey to get there will have shaped me in such ways that I will be grateful for. And this is true time and time again with my journey. So we moved into trying for baby number 2. I had a loss, actually one when I was at Mother's Together in 2018. I had to leave the room for a phone call. I know some of you on the call were in small groups with me. And it was just really hard. And you feel guilty asking for another miracle, right? Why am I not satisfied by my first miracle? And why do I want more? But then the other part of me felt that God had put a calling in my heart to be a mother to more than one child. And it was something that he was calling me to. And so after that loss, we just kind of tried one more time. So this will be our 4th IVF that we went through. Which is a lot. It's a surgery. It's a lot of injections. And for those of you in the call that have gone through it, I'm so sorry. So Isaiah 59:9 goes on to say, so justice is far from us and righteousness does not reach us. We look for light, but all is darkness. For brightness, but we walk in deep shadows like the blind. We grope along the wall, feeling our way like people without eyes. At midday, we stumble as if it were twilight. Among the strong, we are like the dead. We look for justice, but find none. For deliverance, but it is far away. And righteousness stands at a distance. So remember, righteousness is that glad conformity to God's wishes. And it's lived out actually in our relation to others. Is our relationship with God solely selfish? Has our relationship with the Lord changed how we relate to others, especially those that have less than we do? And have we humbled ourselves? And this is such an important lesson, I think, for me. I was so focused on my own goal and what I wanted for my family that I needed to do some more work again, and God needed to work through me. And I feel that this is what really ultimately led me to reframe and refocus how I looked at our attempt to grow our family. And so we got serious about thinking about adoption and what that would look like for our family. And maybe it didn't matter, how the baby was conceived or how we added to our family. All that mattered is that we were able to spread our love and nurture another little soul and raise them in God's word. And so God changed our hearts and I will say I was in Whole Foods and I got this sudden feeling about this idea, and it was something I was familiar with, but I hadn't really pursued, that I really should look into embryo adoption. I never considered it before, was never open to it before because I didn't like the idea of not knowing where that little embryo had come from. But I will tell you, as soon as God planted that seed in my mind, I was on board and I didn't even know why. And so I quickly started researching. I called around, I found out everything I possibly could find out about embryo adoption. And for those unfamiliar on the line, embryo adoption is when you so when people go through IVF, usually they have a lot of leftover embryos. So in our case, we didn't have any leftover to use for siblings, but some people do IVF and they have 8 embryos left and they're not going to have 8 more children. And so they're kind of left with this ethical dilemma of what do we do with those leftover embryos? They can either donate them to science, which some people don't feel ethically good about because they feel like that is a life. Other people can just destroy the embryos or choose to not utilize them in the lab. And then the last option is you can donate them to other couples who are going through infertility who might be able to use them. You can also just keep them in storage forever, which a lot of people do too, because you don't know ethically what to do with them. And luckily, there's a lot of giving people in this world who have extra embryos who want to donate them back to other couples and other families. And in the last few years, it's become more common for these adoptions. I say adoptions because you still carry the baby, right? And give birth to the baby are occurring, and they're becoming open adoptions or open donations, because we know that adopted children benefit from knowing where they come from and having a relationship to where they came from. So the more I researched this, the more excited I got about it with our family and as an option. So I feel like this is God intervening in our lives to bring this forward. And Israel 59:15 says, the Lord looked and was displeased that there was no justice. He saw that there was no one. He was appalled that there was no one to intervene. So in his own arm achieved salvation for him, and his righteousness sustained him. He put on his righteousness as his breastplate and the helmet of salvation for the divine warrior to come. And you guys, I don't know who was there. It had to have been 3 years ago now, when Natalie was super pregnant and she put on her breastplate of righteousness and her helmet of salvation. And I feel like this is just so, I will always picture that when I read those words, Natalie. So shout out to Natalie on the line. So the divine warrior is here for us. We're not alone. As the song illustrated in the beginning, he is here to see us through. And Isaiah 58:8 says, then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call to the Lord, who will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, here am I. And I feel God was answering me in our journey. It was just a different call than I expected. But when I opened myself up to it, it was so clear. And he goes on to say, you will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. The mighty warrior does his full work in the life of the believer. Then the people of God, helpless in themselves, will indeed be the lamps through which the light of God will shine in the world. So this gave us our Bram. So what we did, we went through Embryo Adoption, just kind of to speed things up a little bit. We found a family in Napa. We connected with them. We went through counseling with them and legal paperwork, and they had 1 embryo left, and it was a girl. It was genetically tested. They donated her to us, but when we went to go and plant her, she did not survive being defrosted. And so we were back to starting place. But I will tell you, before I went in to get that embryo transferred, I got an email from this other family that said, I don't know if you're still looking, but we have embryos. Here's a little bit about us. And I was in the shower. I don't know what these moments in our lives, we remember what we were doing for some weird reason. I was in the shower and I got out and read their email. And I remember telling my husband, I don't think this embryo, didn't know yet, that we're about to transfer is going to work. And I think God's trying to tell me that there's something else planned and there's more out there. And I get chills thinking about it still, because those embryos are where my little guy came from. So we ended up going through the process again, doing counseling and transferring. I'm doing another family, and the first embryo, those embryos were not tested. The first embryo we transferred ended up being the baby that I gave birth to in November 2019, when you guys all saw me super pregnant in the sanctuary. So this is not easy stuff, right? But we have to trust that God is with us. When it comes to suffering, we have to abandon our linear thinking, and that X equals plus Y equals Z, right? And that we have that control. Maybe our best life is not success too. Maybe it's hard. Maybe the best life we're going to live isn't easy, but it can be so, so good. I will say that Mark 11:24 was my my beacon of light through all of this. And it says, therefore, I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received and it will be yours. And so I think if you're ever going through a hard time, what I want to share with you about my journey and my experience is that you have to trust in those hard moments that there's a reason and that God is with you, and you will look back at the tapestry of what your life became and be oh so grateful, because I would never change a thing, guys. If I could go back and have a different child sooner than Warner, or go back and not have our little Bram, I would not do it. I will tell you to this day, I was so happy it was not my genetics when I was holding that baby when he first came out, because he is gorgeous. And I'm so grateful for him. And I know that he was meant for our family because he changed us in such a good way. So Bram is named after Abraham. When we were first going through infertility, we found the name Bram as a modern version of Abraham. And if you remember from Genesis 17:16, God says, I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her, about Sarah, who is Abraham's wife. And so we felt that God was promising us a son, or we felt called that we were going to have a son someday, and we had this name Bram. But when Warner was born, he wasn't Bram. It didn't work. And then the whole struggle, even when I miscarried, we knew we were going to have another boy, and we knew it was going to be Bram. And we just focused on that. And it's just incredible to see how God worked in our life to when the timing was right for our little guy. So I'm going to show a picture real quick, if that's okay. You guys can see this. Let me make it a presentation mode here. So these are my little miracles and my testaments to God. I walked by their playroom on the way to do this call, and it's a mess and there's toys everywhere. And my gosh, I am so grateful for these daily reminders of how faithful God is to all of us. So I just want to play a song, if that's okay, Kelly, that is really true. All the lyrics ring true to me, and how I stray from God and he constantly brings me home.
I think, Emily, if you unshare your screen, then I could share my screen. And
Sure.
Perfect. Okay.
Sorry, I know I went over time. Sorry.
No, it was great.